One of the weak points of Power Query is the fact that it doesn't have regex or regular expressions. In this video, I'll be doing a fairly basic regex, which is called /d curly brackets 3 curly brackets. In other words, if the text string contains 3 numbers in a row, like here, 1, 2, 3, then I want to extract that. In cases where I have multiple matches, that is, here I have 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, I want to extract the first segment of 3 numbers. This is what it would look like once I finish actually making the function. I want to extract 3 numbers in a row. If I don't find any matches, I want the output to be no matches. And for sake of completionism, I also want to have a message in case the text string is too short to extract 3 numbers. Because here, 78, I can't have 3 numbers when the text string is 2 characters. Lastly, I want to update the function such that the user can decide what to do in case of multiple matches. Here I want my argument to be last, meaning I want to extract 4, 5, 6 and not 1, 2, 3. Anytime you want to create a function, it's good form to create a parameter, which is what you'll be testing on. After creating the parameter, you want to create a query, which will be converted into a function. That way, whenever you change the query underneath, the function will also be updated. So they'll be linked together. I'm just going to call this values. Actually, yeah. And the current value is just going to be A123. I'll deal with the simple case first. Now I can add an empty query, which will be my function, but not the actual function that I call. I'll reserve that name for the function. So I'll call this tester query 1. To begin with, I want to convert the value into an actual string. I could have a number and I just want to be sure that it's absolutely definitely a text. I could also have a column without a data type. So I'll first convert it into text. And it's not a problem that inside this query I'm referencing the parameter, because again, once this gets converted into a function, any reference to the parameter will then instead be a reference to the argument that you pass into the function. I want to figure out what the length of the text string is, because I need to loop through this text string, grabbing 3 characters at a time, and then I need to check, are these 3 characters all numbers? If yes, then I found my match. If not, I can keep going. This is simply text length, which then calls the source step. And it's very good practice to name the steps. The whole point of having this tester query is that it's easier to understand when you have to go back and actually change the function. In my specific case, since I want to make the D3 regex, I want to figure out how many loops I have to do, which is then the length minus 2. And this is also what I can use to determine if I have a too short text string. Because if this output is negative, then I have 1 or 2 characters. Or I could have 0, I guess. There are many ways to do the next step in order to create digits ranging from 1 to the last number.
What do you think about this?
Actually, I'm going to do this instead of list generate. This is a lot easier to read. Create a list starting from the text 0 up until the text version of the number of loops. In this case, 0 through 2, but I don't want to start at 0, I want to start at 1, so that was my mistake. The alternative would be to use list generate, which I will eventually get around to showing what it can do, because it can do some neat things. Right now, I simply want to say an empty function because the list generate takes an initial function and I just want this to be blank. This is a looper function, which is why I'm dedicating half a video to it. But right now, what's important to know is that I want to start from a value of 1. So my initial as function means an empty function that goes towards 1, which simply means a function that outputs 1. I want to say for each row, I want to take the value and continue looping as long as the current value is less than the number of loops plus 1. And it doesn't want to give me intelligence. Now it does. So keep looping as long as my number is less than the number of loops plus 1. And then what do I want to do for each row? I want to take the current value and add 1. So it starts out at 1. It says, is 1 less than the number of loops plus 1? Well, yes, because the number of loops plus 1 is 3. And if so, I want to take the current value, which is then 1, and add 1 to it. And that's the value in the next loop. So that's then 2. And because my current value is now 3, which is not less than the number of loops plus 1, it terminates. I'll be using this much simpler syntax instead. I then turn the list into a table in order to add columns to it later, using the handy little button in the GUI. In any case, this is my table. What I want to do is then extract 3 digits at a time. So here I want the first 3 digits, then the next 3 digits, so digit 2, 3, and 4, which I can do with a new column, which is going to use the text middle function. And my text is still the source and not actually the value in any of the columns. And then the start position is the column 1 value minus 1. Because the way this works is 1 minus 1 is then 0. Go after position 0 and then extract 3 digits. And then of course, because this function outputs text instead, I need to convert these into numbers instead, which fortunately I can just do by pressing the little whole number button, because it understands that quotation marks 1 quotation marks can be converted into a number. So that was the downside of using this function, since it outputs text. So now I have the first 3, the next 3, and since the text only has 4 values, I only have 2 rows. I can then test whether this cell can be converted into a number by adding another column, where I first want to try to convert it into a number, and then I want to ask, can this be converted into the number data type? And A12 is going to call an error because you can't convert A12 into a number, but 1, 2, 3 can be converted into true. And it's not a problem that this gives an error. That's something that I can handle. Or rather, it's expected because that simply means this row isn't valid. Then I want to call this isNumber. I'm actually going to take advantage of the function throwing an error in case the value isn't a number, because I can then say remove rows that give me errors. And then if I have multiple matches, I will have multiple rows, which means that this is where you decide whether you want to extract the first valid segment or if you want the last. Which means all I have to do to extract the first one, because this is what I want my first function to do, I can simply say 0 and isNumber. And it would help if I put the curly bracket in the correct position, but I don't actually want to extract the isNumber column. I want to extract the extract3 column, because that is the actual value. The regex /d curly bracket 3 curly bracket applied on A123 is going to give me 1, 2, 3. Then I want to check whether the length is actually valid, which I can simply do by saying is the number of loops equal to or greater than 1, or alternatively I could say is the length equal to 3 or more, and I think I'll do that instead. So is the length equal to or greater than 3, which is true, so that's fine. That means it's at least 3 digits long. Lastly, I need to determine what my output should be, which is then going to be if the text is then at least 3 digits. If this is false, then I want to output text string is too short. Secondly, I want to check if the row count of the removed errors table is equal to 0, because then I have no matches. Lastly, if both checks fail, then I want to extract the first 3-digit segment. Now I can change this parameter in order to play around and figure out what it should give. So here I have 2 valid segments, but the function will only extract the first 3, so it will still give 1, 2, 3. And if it's A1, it's too short, and if it's a valid length, but it has no matches, it's going to output no matches. Then I can convert it into a function. And of course, you could also play around with this in order to create an actual /dx function where you'd be able to change the number dynamically based on what you need. That wasn't what I did. If I actually had a business case where I needed it, I'd do that. Here's what I said at the beginning. It doesn't matter that I'm referring a parameter. When I convert it into a function, this will be the argument I pass in. And then all of the steps get converted into this chunky inner query, which I don't like. And that's why you always want to go in and change the function from here, because the tester query and the function are tied together. But that means I can now add the function, and actually I should use invoke custom function, which is that, and it knows that it takes values, my argument, and I can input a column, so that's fine. For the next function, I need an extra parameter, so I'm going to copy these two and put them in their own group. I need a second parameter, which is going to be an optional argument. So if you add last, it's going to grab the last match in case you have multiple, and that's just going to be true. So I actually wonder if it understands that it's going to be binary. It says please enter value, but I can't actually type anything. I can't select it, so that's odd. I guess it's because it wants a binary query, which I'm not going to bother with. Instead, I'm going to say any value. I'm going to try this and then see if it understands that true with small letters should be, yeah, okay, it does understand that. And all I need to do actually is to add an extra step where I reference the parameter. Then I need to fix this to be source. And then here I don't want to reference source, I want to reference last yes. And it does understand this is a binary. And I do actually need to change the value, current value, so it has multiple matches to choose between. And the problem was it was being silly, and here in the added custom step, I was also referencing source, which got updated when I added an extra step. So sometimes it could be nice if you have to add a step earlier to go into advanced editor and add it like here, because it wouldn't be difficult to add this. And I should also name this, so that would honestly be easier, which means I have my match here and I have my match here. And like before, when I remove errors, I now have 2 rows because I have 2 matches. So I don't want to do this, always extracting 3. What I want instead is to say that if my last match yes step, if that's not equal to true, because it's supposed to be an optional argument, so if you input nothing, it will be null, then I want to return the first match. Otherwise, I want to sort the removed errors table based on my first column in a descending order, because that way the order will be flipped. And now I can extract the 0th row. Actually, I need to move to the right. Extract the 0th row from extract 3 column. Right now the argument is true. I want to extract the last match, and otherwise everything is the same. It's the addition of one extra line, which references a new variable, and then changing this step to actually reflect the option you chose. Which means that now when I call it, I can call it twice. I need to turn it into a function first. And the only thing I'm a bit worried with, because I did not actually test this part, is that I made both of these parameters required and this one is not required, and that's the point. I do want it to be optional. That's kind of the point. If you don't input the argument, then I assume you want the first option. So I just want to check if it works the way I think it does, and I need to press the right button, and I forgot to turn it into a query. So I'll do that. Create function. So I do have 2 parameters, which is what I expect. And the funny thing is it says optional here, which is actually the required argument. And last yes is not optional, at least it doesn't write it. And what I want is to say last yes optional. And in my helper file, I manually changed the function, which I can try doing because I think it should be mad at me. Yeah, if I manually change the function, it's going to get mad. It will split the function where the query and the function are tied together. And I don't want to get rid of that because it's very helpful with changing functions. But like I said, I haven't actually tried doing it this way. I didn't know inside parameters that you could make it required or not required. So again, it says values 2 is optional, but last yes isn't. So that's kind of weird. The good news is I did figure out what my mistake was. In my parameter, I said that it's allowed to be a binary because I figured binary means true false. Binary is like when you load a file, that would be a binary data type. So I misunderstood what binary means. So the correct thing to do is for parameters, I need to select true false, and then I can actually write true false. And I could also do something like this maybe to give the user drop down instead. And then because the normal behavior for regex is to grab the first match, so I do want to set it to false. I want to reiterate that I did not select required here because I thought that meant that the argument would be optional, which means it would have the text here optional. And again, I'm not going to do this because it will break the connection between my function and query. But if I were to do it, the word optional would be here before last yes. In any case, I can now actually invoke the custom function, and I can then say, and I guess it doesn't carry over that it should be Boolean, so that kind of sucks. But in any case, when I provide the argument true, I get 4, 5, 6 in this last row, which is what I want. And when I write false, I will get 1, 2, 3. Lastly, I want to take my regex d3 optional function and convert it so that the last portion is actually optional. Because right now you do have to actually type in true or false. If I put in nothing, then I'll get an error because I can't convert nothing into type logical. So if I just duplicate the function, and I'm just going to call this actually optional. Here I'm going to break the connection between the query and the function by writing optional. It was already broken, I guess, because this function was a copy of another function. So now I can actually see values as any and optional last yes. Now I have to manually change the individual steps. I can't do them with a helper query where I can visualize the step. I have to do it in the code, but it's not terribly difficult. What I want to do is to test whether the value last yes is type logical, which is called logical and not Boolean. And if this is true, then I want to return the value last yes. Otherwise, I want to return false. That way, if I don't input anything, it should give false. And if I input something wrong, it should also give false. Which means if you write anything other than true, it's going to write false, basically. Then down here, I need to find the right place. Yeah, if last match yes is equal to false, and I actually think I changed that. Yep, I did. When I cheated, I was doing this originally, not equal to true, but I may as well write equals false because it's functionally the same, but this is easier to read. So in any situation where last match yes isn't equal to true, it will be set to false. And then I just say if it is false, I want to extract the first match, otherwise I want to extract the last match. So that was really all I had to do. Add optional in front of the argument, which would break the connection between the function and the query, and then add this check. So now I should be able to call, actually, yeah. This might be a problem that it's type logical, but you'll see that in a moment. Because it does say it should be a boolean, and then it's kind enough to say example true, but I'm going to write gibberish, which it won't accept because it's not a type logical. So I can actually press OK. And I don't think I can leave it blank. I can actually, okay, that's nice. So if you input an argument of null, because that isn't true, it gets converted into false. And likewise, this is not allowed because it's not type logical. But I think if I go in here and say it shouldn't be logical, it should be as any. And then it checks in this portion, it checks if I write true or false with small letters, because that will be interpreted as logical, because it can be converted into the type. So now if I write AA, that can't be converted into logical, which means it gets converted into false, which is then logical, which means false isn't true, which means I get the first match. And if I write false with small letters, that gets interpreted as the Boolean operator false, which is then false. And if I write true, that gives me 456. So now if I remove the argument, it should also work. So this is a bit more effort, and you can decide whether this is more intuitive for your user. They probably shouldn't be playing around with custom functions in any case, but this is an option. So yep,